Is it possible to shoot compelling product videography without using a camera? The techniques I'm about to show you will change everything about how you make content. Imagine you got a product to shoot. You'll need a camera, proper lighting, a set, materials to do practical effects, maybe even someone to help you. It's all adding up quickly and you can sense your wallet slinking off into a dark corner. You know you have a story to tell and you don't want the cost to get in the way. What if I told you there's a way to do it all for free and that the only thing holding you back are a few basic skills that are just a tutorial away? I know. You'd think I was crazy, and you're probably right. Just like in our other videos, we're going to use the free 3D software Blender to make it happen. This won't be your typical run-of-the-mill product videography. Think of it as a product animation instead, and all you need is a computer and an idea to get started. I'll walk you through the rest. Make sure to stay till the end to see the final render. Let's get into it. I have tons of these spectrum markers laying around my studio, so I'm going to use them. Looking at one of them a bit more closely, I've already got some theories as to how to model it, at least part of the way. Step number one, and this is an important one, I've got to have some good music, something ambient and lo-fi. Let me know in the comments what you like to listen to while being creative. When 3D modeling, it's important to realize that everything can be distilled down into primitive shapes. For instance, most markers are just long cylinders. However, these spectrum markers are a bit unique, and I don't think a cylinder is going to work in this case, so I'm going to try a cube. What I'm looking to do is match the shape in Blender to the top of the marker. You can do this by going into edit mode and essentially moving around the position of vertices until it starts to resemble your desired object. Cool, that looks like a marker to me. Tip, reference the product you choose a lot so you don't miss anything important about the shape or composition of it. Right now, this is a good starting point, but it's missing some of the smaller details. Where the cap meets the body, I can see there's a divot. I'm going to reproduce it, then use the same technique to make other divots too. There we go, we're getting somewhere. On the cap, there's a little area that's indented, sort of like a half moon. This is going to require some experimenting because I'm not totally sure how to model it. My inclination is to use Box Cutter, which is a Blender add-on that's meant to help with hard surface modeling. You can get Box Cutter from the Blender market, and I'll drop a link in the description if you want to check it out. Keep in mind that you don't need to use Box Cutter though. You can use an add-on that's built in called the Bool tool, and it'll do the same job as Box Cutter in this case. Also, if you do use Box Cutter, it's great and all, but make sure to pay attention to detail because I just cut through the model on the wrong face. Whoops. Let's try that again. It's the little things that people will pay attention to in order to learn the features of a product. The way that I made the cut didn't work the second time either. Third time's the charm. If you take another look at the marker, you'll notice that the ends stick out a bit, which is where the colors are that distinguish them from one another. Just a simple extrusion should do the trick, so I can add that part in. We're pretty much there, except for making the marker look more realistic. If you've watched my other videos, then you've probably heard me say before that completely sharp edges don't exist in real life, so I'm going to soften them. The way we soften these edges is by just going into edit mode and adding a simple bevel to them. Cool, that's our model. I know the next step is to color and texture it. I'm 90% sure of how to get the look I want. I know the marker is a hard plastic material and what kind of properties those tend to have. The only part that I don't know yet is how to deal with the label, but I'll figure it out. Starting off with the easy stuff first, I'm going to add the color tips to the end of the marker. I'm selecting the faces that I need to change and telling Blender that this part will need a different color. I'm assigning the black color to the body and the green color to the tips. Side note, don't be like me. Save your project immediately and keep saving it so that you don't put a lot of work into it only to have it disappear. I'm totally not foreshadowing or anything. For the label, I'm going to see if I can find a picture, a flat-facing image of the marker. Something that has a decent resolution to it would be preferable. If you can't find one online, you can always take one yourself using a camera or your cell phone. To get the labeling onto the model, I'm going to UV unwrap this one face right here. Moment of truth, it looks like it worked. It actually looks like it worked really well. That's really cool. I was a little skeptical about that. I'm happy with how it's coming together, so I'm going to start making smaller edits. You can see that the marker is looking a little matte, and it should be a bit more reflective. I'm going to bring the roughness down. Okay, we've got our model, and it's textured. What's sick is that came together pretty quickly. Now we need to set up our scene. Before I do anything else, I'm going to add a camera so that we don't waste time modeling stuff that it can't see. I'm adding in a light to help the reflections and highlights of the marker catch, since this isn't meant to be just a flat image. Just note, this lighting setup will change several times before I arrive at the one that I like. Lighting is a stylistic choice, and I encourage you to play around with your own light rigs as well. I have this idea to make multiple markers with different colors, so I'm going to duplicate my existing ones and spread them out in a pattern that I think is cool, like that, maybe? Another friendly reminder to save your work. I'm going to come in and change the colors of each one. Nice. I'd like to get some depth of field going, so I'm going to add an empty and tell the camera to pull focus by following the position of the empty. Moving the markers in the background further away from the main one will also help introduce a sharper depth of field. So far, it looks pretty cool. Another thing I can do is raise the f-stop to balance out the blurriness. This is one of those moments where your digital art is better when you're familiar with the real-life rules of filmmaking and photography. You know what? I don't like the seam the floor is creating with our background. Originally, I had a plane for my floor, but instead I'm going to build a digital cycle. A cyc wall is a set where it's curved when the back wall and the floor meet. It's seamless and you don't see where the set ends. They're used a lot in product videography and photography. To make one, I'll add in a cube, delete the faces except for the back and bottom. On the back line, I'll add a bevel. Now I'm going to start animating my camera and add in some keyframes. Cool, I like that. Now I'm bringing in some motion blur because that's what happens in real life when you're using a real camera. We're now ready to render our first shot. We want these to be in 4K. I'm switching my render engine to Eevee instead of Cycles to help it render faster. I'm going to reanimate the camera and markers a few times to get different shots. The few shots I've rendered so far involve basic keyframing, but we're going to add a shot to our video with falling markers. And the reason that this is worth talking about is because this one won't require any keyframes. The way that we'll pull this off is by doing a rigid body simulation. In the physics tab for each marker, you want to add a rigid body tag, and then you want to highlight your cyc wall and add the same rigid body tag. However, we are going to set this object to passive. This means that when our simulation is running, the item won't move, but it will still act as an object that our markers can interact with. One thing that's important to note here is that we have to tell Blender to use the shape of our mesh for our cyc wall's physics property, rather than the primitive shape that was used to build it. Under the collisions header, we want to change our shape from convex hull to mesh. If we don't change it from mesh and leave it as convex hull, this will happen. Not quite what we're looking for. Once this is all set up, take your markers or objects that you want to fall and position them to the top of your frame and then hit play to watch the magic take place. Some people don't like modeling. Some people don't like keyframing. If you're one of those people that doesn't like keyframing like this guy, then rigid body simulations will be your new best friend. The great thing about them is that once you set one object as a rigid body, you can start duplicating the objects, and the objects will start interacting with each other in the physics simulation. I love this, and it's the bane of my existence. Remember that warning I gave you earlier in the video about saving your project? This is when I didn't listen to myself and I got a little too carried away with the copying and pasting of the marker, so Blender decided to go on strike. It's good practice when you're done with your simulation to go into the scene properties and drop down rigid body world, then cache and bake. It tells Blender to store the animation in the memory of the computer. The benefit here is that it saves Blender the step of recalculating the simulation every time, which means that you can introduce other things after that and render out your shot like normal. With all of my shots rendered, I'm now ready to focus on editing. I have Premiere, but you can do this entire editing process with DaVinci Resolve for free. I'm throwing all clips in my timeline in the order that I want. I'm going into Artlist to choose a song, and I'm going to sync up the clips with the music. After about 4 hours of work, this project is finished, which is pretty fast, all things considered. Let's take a look at the final render.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I were to do a project like this one as a freelancer, there's a ton of benefits to this workflow. I don't have to wait for people's schedules to align. I didn't lose an hour before and after setting up and striking equipment. I could have invested no money at all in the process of making this, and because I did it all myself, I'd keep all of my earnings. So I think we answered the question. Do you need a camera to shoot product videography? No. This process can also be used to create spec ads that you can send to companies, and if you're lucky, they may even buy them from you. I've done this before and I can confirm that it works. If you want to hear more about that, let me know down below. Getting ideas and assets for your videos is another time-consuming process. To avoid this pitfall, make sure you watch this video next.